tonight.
Bob, this is a whole new look to the scarab thing. I mean, you know, the whole...
One of the richest and most powerful men in America, Irwin Jacobs, a ruthless financial competitor you'd rather be playing for than against.
People have said about you, he can either be your very best friend or your very worst enemy.
That's about as true a statement I think that's ever been said about me. It's very difficult to rationalize to what lengths I will go for either direction.
Young, handsome, and a rising star in the pro tennis circuit, David Wheaton is getting all the attention he can handle.
Once you get picked up in a limo in the airport, you don't want to get picked up in a regular car. You know, that's just human nature almost. So I really tried to just get a perspective on it and try not to just expect things just because I'm a good tennis player.
Now you may be facing your greatest storm.
And the First Lady of TV Evangelism, Tammy Faye Baker. The Minnesota native is trying to make a ministry comeback after her husband, Jim, was convicted of fraud and conspiracy.
I'm just a very real, down-to-earth, ordinary person, and I wish people would look past the eyelashes and see me, please.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. You know, 40 years ago in a little church in International Falls, Tammy Faye Baker says she found God and that He changed her life forever. It's that faith, she says, that's kept her sane for the past 5 years. Years when she saw her husband Jim convicted and sent to prison, when she was left alone, abandoned by her closest friends. We've tried many times to get Tammy to sit down and talk about her life without Jim, without PTL, without the lavish lifestyle we've all read about. And she always said no. She was too bitter about it, and it hurt too much. But a few months ago in Rochester, where she had flown to visit Jim in prison, she finally agreed to meet us. It's time to trust somebody, she said. It might as well be you. In just a moment, we'll be back with Tammy Faye Baker's story.
A Pat Miles special is brought to you by Menards, your complete home improvement headquarters, and by Tefal. When it comes to deep frying, we've thought of it all.
When I was 10 years old, something really special happened to me. I asked the Lord Jesus Christ to come into my life. And when I did, He became everything to me. He really did. He changed me. What do you want to be when you grow up? I always said I want to be a minister.
So rise up in faith, my friend, today, for this too shall pass. Yes, this
Tammy Baker is well known throughout the world, but it is more for her husband's scandal than her singing, more for her makeup than her ministry. It is a cold reality she has come to accept.
You know, people have made me into a cartoon character. All you see when they talk about me is a pair of eyelashes and a giggle and lots of tears. And that's not me at all. It just isn't. It isn't me. I am probably the most down-to-earth person you'll ever meet. The only reason that I have been able to go through the terrible ridicule and listen to the terrible lies and go through the terrible things that we have been through and the distrust of people and things like that, you know, and losing all of our dear friends is because I know God.
Have you ever been in a situation where you thought God was never going to answer? And then just a few months later, when you weren't even thinking about it, God answered in a glorious, marvelous way. My grandma used to sing this song when I was a little girl.
My grandma always used to say, she would tell me never ever to give up. She'd say, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, Tammy Faye, and you keep going. My grandma always told me that. My mother's a very strong woman, and we have very strong women in our family, and I think I learned strength through the strong women in our family.
If the women in Tammy Faye LaValle's family were strong, they had to be. Life in International Falls was hard. There were 8 children to feed. There was very little money, and they lived in a home with no indoor plumbing.
I love a small town. I will always love a small town. I worked at Woolworths in International Falls, and Jim said the reason that I'm only 4'11" is that the growing season was short there. But I walked to work at 40 below zero weather just like everybody else. And I graduated from high school at Falls High School. And I still have family in International Falls, Minnesota.
Tammy hasn't been back to visit in years, but the house where she grew up is still there, still home to her stepfather, Fred, and her half-brother, Dan Grover.
I had so many brothers and sisters, and I worked really hard as a little girl at home, you know, helping Mother raise the kids. And I don't think that, I think I was looking for something besides hard work, you know, something there wasn't something satisfying in my life. And every time I went over to that church, everybody was so happy and they were so excited and they just seemed to have something that I didn't have. And so one day at prayer meeting, when they asked if anyone would like to accept Jesus in their heart, I raised my hand and I ran down to that altar at that church and I asked Jesus to come into my heart and my life. And I've never been the same since.
I remember Tammy when she went to the Assemblies of God church. I used to go there when I was a teenager. And I just remember her as being a real sweet gal, cute, real Cupid doll. And
she was well liked, I know that. Everybody said how nice and well liked and polite and everything she was. She just went out of her way, you know, to try and be that way, it seemed like. And she was always trying to be like some kind of little actress. I mean, she liked that kind of part of it.
Even to those neighbors who didn't know her well, Tammy seemed bound for bigger things than International Falls had to offer. It came in the form of a savings account her Aunt Jen started. Enough money to go to Minneapolis and pay the tuition at North Central Bible College. There, she discovered the big city and boys, particularly one boy, Jim Baker, the handsomest thing she says she'd ever seen in her life. Do you remember your first meeting with him?
Oh, yes. I had seen Jim in the hallways. I thought he was really cute when I saw him, but I didn't think he'd ever fall for me because I felt like a little plain Jane. And so a girlfriend that had been at the school came up one day and she came up to the room and she said, Tammy, she says, do you know that Jim Baker likes you and would like to take you out? Well, I almost died on the spot. You know how teenagers are. Oh, you know? And I went out with Jim and never dated anyone after that.
You know, you still sound like you're just wildly in love.
We are. He's a wonderful man.
With all that you've been through, Tammy, it's amazing.
It is amazing. I don't believe I'm here. And I know Jim belongs to God. He doesn't belong to me. He belongs to God. And I have committed my husband to God. And I've committed myself to God and our family to God. And I just said, Lord, who are we to say that he shouldn't walk through a prison?
For the last 2 years, Jim Baker has been walking through this prison in Rochester. Originally sentenced to 45 years in jail, his term was reduced last August, making him eligible for parole in 4 years.
In fact, Tammy and I are partners with PTL, and we give every month to this ministry.
Before his conviction, he and Tammy were operating a $100 million a year enterprise. It began in the early 60s with the Christian Broadcasting Network, where they were hired to do the Jim and Tammy show. Eventually, it evolved into the 700 Club, then later the PTL. In 1978, now a successful and well-known television evangelist, Baker purchased 2,300 acres of land just south of Charlotte, South Carolina. And there he began to build Heritage USA, a religious retreat. It was his dream and his downfall. He was convicted of fraud and conspiracy for selling more vacations at Heritage than the facility could accommodate. And there were also revelations of an affair with his church secretary, Jessica Hahn, and the use of ministry funds to keep her quiet. Throughout it all, Tammy stood fast by Jim.
I have never been involved with wife swapping.
Never.
I'm not a homosexual.
Right.
And I've never been to a prostitute, but...
You've not lost faith in him, but so many people did when all of this happened.
And they shouldn't have, because he's going to be a greater man than he's ever been before. Okay, let me tell you the money the government has accused us of stealing. They've accused us of stealing our own salary. The 3-point-something million that they said we stole was our salary voted for us by the board of directors.
I remember reading the most outlandish things about air-conditioned doghouses.
Yeah, and we didn't have an air-conditioned doghouse. The doghouse was heated for my dogs. I had 5 dogs, which I loved dearly, and I couldn't stand to have the dogs outside. And so we got an old system that Jim found somewhere that had been just an old air conditioning heating system that he bought and put in that doghouse to heat the doghouse. It was never once air conditioned. It was heated in the winter for those dogs. And for anyone to make such a big deal out of a doghouse, I don't understand that. It was foolishness. If you saw the doghouse, you'd just laugh.
Well, Tammy, people did want you guys to suffer.
Yes, they did. And if they wanted us to suffer, we did.
One of my friends said to me, what I want to know is she for real?
This is all there is. There isn't any more. What you see is what you get.
Well, how did your makeup become?
I don't know. I guess because my hips weren't big enough. So they had to pick on something, so they took these peepers.
You know, in an interview I read that was done with you in 1986, one of the things you said was, it would be interesting to me to see who my friends are if PTL should fail. Mm-hmm. Did you find that out?
My band and singers surprised me the most.
What happened?
Because I love them so much.
The PTL Singers!
I trusted everyone. Jim trusted everyone. If someone said they loved us, we said, oh, we're so glad, and we loved them back. We didn't even ever question. We never dreamed that most of them loved us because we were giving them a good paycheck.
What was your darkest moment through all of this?
When they chained Jim, someone who had flown on Air Force One with the President of the United States, and when they chained him and took him across the television stations of the world.
Were you at any point, Tammy, afraid that you were going to go on trial as well?
There was some possibility. They were trying to indict me, I understand, but all I did was sing, so it's pretty hard to indict somebody that just stands there and sings.
How have your children done with this situation?
We've been going through this for 5 years. It's not just this is something that just happened. We've been going through, excuse the word, hell, real hell for 5 years. And it's the children that have suffered, but it's the children who have, I really believe, come out on top. You know, it's so wonderful. Just in time, I was able to be a mom, and I love being a mom. I love washing clothes for that kid and fixing meals for him. And when I was at Heritage USA, of course, you know, we had people that were helping us do those things. And I didn't know my children real well because we were so busy. I was busy doing television all the time. And I'm so grateful as a mom for the opportunity to get to raise my child. I'm really glad that I got to do that because I almost missed out.
That was the silver lining.
Mm-hmm. I've learned how to be a single woman. I never thought I could. I've been married since I was 19 years old, and someone took care of me for all those years. I had to learn how to put gas in the car, how to go to school and register children in school. I had to learn how to pay bills. I had to learn how to make a living from our family. And I learned that you don't die. You take one day at a time, and you live, and you make it.
Today, Tammy makes it on the contribution she receives from her church congregation in Orlando, Florida. And for the first time, she has begun to venture out to other churches across the country.
We also want to mention to you that Miss Baker, of course, is here to minister.
Just give you a cue that I'm ready.
Yeah. She's not here for publicity purposes.
You can pretty well tell when I'm ready to sing, and I'll just do that, and you can go ahead. All right, Ed, okay.
So please, welcome, and you may enter.
Praise the Lord. Welcome. Blessed.
And today, you can be a witness to the fact that nothing and no one has stopped Tammy Faye Baker from continuing to share the life-changing gospel of Jesus Christ.
Earlier this month, she was at the Redeeming Love Christian Center just outside Newark, New Jersey. And there, before 3,000 people, Tammy did what she does best. She prayed and sang and cried.
A lot of times we talk in faith. And that's how I ministered, because it was the only way I knew to minister was in faith. Because things hadn't happened to me yet. But this time I can talk from knowledge. And I can talk from experience. And I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world.
I never thought they would accept Tammy without the Jim on it. But in my heart, I knew I also was supposed to minister.
I want whatever it takes, Lord, for you to dig down deep and for you to get this root of bitterness out of my heart. That's number one.
Were you disappointed, Tammy, after the resentencing?
I was extremely disappointed when I thought, you know, Jim is going to have to serve at least 4 more years. It becomes real. 40-some years is not reality, but 4 years is. It's 4 Christmases, it's 4 birthdays, it's 4 everything, you know.
Are you lonely?
I'm very lonely. I'm extremely lonely. I don't do good when I'm lonely, and I've been very lonely, but God has helped me, and He's helped fill those empty places.
Tammy, wouldn't it be easier just to kind of
fade away?
Yeah.
I've been trying.
Have you really?
Yes, I've been trying to fade. I've been trying. I've been asked for ever since what happened with PTL. They've been wanting me to come, and I just wouldn't do it. And finally, this time, I just grabbed the bull by the horns and said, "Yes, I'll do it."
Later on a Pat Miles special, checking in on former guest Mike Lynn, who left the Vikings to take on the world a year ago. And a visionary we visited in Yugoslavia appears in the Twin Cities. But first, David Wheaton's learning his way to success on the pro tennis tour sometimes puts his private life in the public limelight.
I don't want to start getting into that and who I'm going out with this week, who I'm going out with next week. I'd rather keep that to myself because it just gets always blown out of proportion. I think, you know, someone like Boris Becker, who's, you know, gone out with so many different girls, it's gotten him in so much trouble. He's had to always be putting up press releases and stuff like that. If he just keep his mouth shut, he'd be fine.
Years ago on these tennis courts here at Northwest Racket Club in Minneapolis, a little boy dreamed of becoming the best tennis player in the world. He worked hard, practiced all the time, and he began winning junior tournaments. Today, David Wheaton is 22 years old, and he's ranked 12th in the world. He's still working hard, practicing all the time. But he's not dreaming about becoming number 1 in the world anymore. He's making it happen.
Somehow, David Wheaton's still alive.
You have to practice a lot to become good. I just try to work on some parts of my game.
Get the right contact point.
I like to serve and volley sometimes. And I definitely want to play pro tennis and be as high as I can in the ranks. Definitely in the top 50 in the world. I'll strive for number 1, but not everyone can be. Only one person can be number 1.
My more immediate goal in tennis is to win a Grand Slam title, preferably Wimbledon. I think if I had beaten Boris, I might have done it. It's amazing how close it was. You can't ever, survive from your last victory. That's the problem with tennis. You can't just kind of, ride the wave of your last victory. You have to, keep on pushing ahead.
Oh my! 30 miles.
David Wheaton never doubted that he would end up on center court at Wimbledon. In his mind, he's been playing here since he was a small child. In his dreams, this is where he longs to win. It's still a dream for this 22-year-old from Cottagewood, Minnesota, but one that almost came true this year when he made it all the way to the semifinals, beating Yvonne Lindell and Andre Agassi. It was Boris Becker who finally woke David up, but just barely. Their match was one of the best at Wimbledon, and it was close all the way. But this was no fluke. David Wheaton has worked hard for these moments in the limelight.
I remember I always wanted to hit backhands because I always played hockey and that was my best shot. So my first tournament was at the Minnetonka Country Club, and it wasn't really an official tournament, sort of a club tournament. And I beat my best friend in the semis, and then in the final I was 8 years old and I played a 12-year-old. And I think I lost, maybe in a kind of a close match, maybe 8-5 or something. It wasn't a full 2 out of 3 set match. And I was so competitive that I wouldn't shake his hand. I just walked back to the fence and sat down and started crying, and my opponent was standing at the net waiting for me to shake hands, and I wouldn't shake hands. And so finally my best friend, who was sitting in the sideline watching, finally he thought of a good idea to go get me a grape crush, bring it out to me, and talk to me in the back of the court, and he convinced me to go shake his hand. So
is that how you learned sportsmanship in that game of tennis, in that world of tennis?
Yeah, I was I think I was a little bit of a sore loser. I was, or just really fiercely competitive at a very young age. It seems like I'm not quite as competitive now, just because I've kind of learned to kind of hone it down into my tennis matches now.
Is there somebody in tennis that is a hero to David Wheaton, somebody that you look at and you want to emulate?
It sounds probably pretty opinionated, but I don't think young Americans in this group we have now, the group of 5 of us, really had anyone to look up to. I mean, McEnroe and Connors were the big American guys back then, but what kind of example were they setting for young tennis players? McEnroe was, out of control with his temper, and Connors is, you know how he was earlier in his career. So what kind of example could that really be, especially to someone who grew up in, my kind of atmosphere in the family? That wasn't, something I could really look up to. So really, I really haven't had anyone.
Did your parents look at McEnroe and say, "Now, don't you ever act like that out on the tennis court"?
Well, they didn't have to say that. I just knew it. They told me, if you ever act up on the court and do anything to make our family name, lose respect, you're gonna be pulled right off the court. Tennis wasn't worth losing what they had worked on to have me, accomplish as a person.
David cooks a mean spaghetti. I don't know if I'd suggest it to everyone, but I'm used to it after all these years.
David Wheaton is a product of the tight-knit Wheaton family, an honest-to-goodness all-American boy, raised on homespun principles like diligence and hard work.
My mom started me out, and she's always been there behind me with the support. A 12-year-old doesn't have much motivation, he doesn't always see the big picture. And I think my mother did at that age. But she never was a pushy tennis parent. Like, there's just so many of them. She was never really like that. It was always, she wanted me to practice, but she never made it so I didn't enjoy it, or it wasn't something that was forced, really. So, and then my 2 brothers were the ones that were traveling with me to all the junior tournaments, and they had their impact also.
And David's family continues to play a major role in his career. Calling themselves Team Wheaton, each one of them contributes to the goal, helping David become the #1 tennis player in the world.
It's a unique situation. I happened to be going to law school at the same time David was going to college, and we kind of grew up together. So I kind of saw where he was going with his career, so it made sense for me to kind of come along and help out. I'm really there as a protector, and not just to help him find deals, but to really advise him on his schedule, on the contracts we do, and things like that. So, though I'm his brother, I try to be as professional as possible with him.
The thing I can offer to most to David is the strategy, because that was the strongest part of my game, is the thinking part. But I'm not as natural player as David, so I can never put it into practice as well as he could. So the strategy is where it's at. I mean, that stuff you do on the court is what decides whether you're going to lose in the first round or get to the semis.
That's where you sit. You might want to go all the way to your far right.
Can I take this back, John?
Today's best American tennis players are the same young boys David grew up competing against at the junior tennis camps. Pete Sampras, Jim Courier, Andre Agassi. Last April, they were facing each other again, but this time David was the hometown favorite.
And a native of Deep Haven, Minnesota, please welcome our own David Wheaton.
Who on the tour that you play with now is, would you say is your closest friend? Agassi?
No, it wouldn't be Andre. Andre's pretty inaccessible. Not a lot of guys like him. He doesn't hang around the locker room at all, and he's just not there. I don't really have any close friends, people that I'd say that I look forward to going to a tournament to see and having dinner with. It's just a strange environment. Just under the skin, there's this underlying competitive, cutthroat instinct that I think the top tennis players have, and I think that's just the way it has to be.
So David's going to demonstrate hitting the ball with his eyes closed, right, Dave? Yep. Give him a hand, folks. Nice job.
Life on the Pro Tour is pretty heady stuff for a young man. David says he's seen what it can do to a person, especially a young person. The money, the fame, the adulation.
What's your name? Nicholas. Nicholas, huh? Where are you from? I think when I have kids, it's going to take an effort on my part to forget myself, because everyone's always, been, David this, David that, David did this, David did that. I want to make sure that when I have kids, I'd like to put all the attention on them and just take myself completely out of it. But I think I'm going to have trouble doing it. I mean, it's going to be something I'm going to have to work on for sure.
2, 1, 2, 3. I
haven't heard the number yet.
I'll give you the pen.
One of the things that you see with pro athletes is exactly what you're saying, that so much attention is focused on them and their needs and how they feel that day and what they want that day. I mean, it almost seems like it would be impossible to come out of that and not be self-centered and not be selfish and not be sort of unaware of other people and what they're doing and thinking and feeling.
I don't think I have that attitude. I don't think I get in that attitude. It's just more or less, it's just almost the way of life, because it's almost, I mean, it sounds so bad, but it's almost a way of life. Like, for instance, I played this exhibition last weekend. They fly me down first class, a limo at the airport. I get there, it's a press conference, there's an autograph signing at 5. They have a cocktail party for me at 8. The next day I play a match, and I'm on the cover of the program, and then I have to do a million other things, and it's all centered on me the whole weekend. So that's almost my way of life now, you see?
Do you like that lifestyle?
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It depends on the situation.
Well, how could you not like having everything focused on you? I mean, it's got to be kind of neat.
It's draining. It really is. It's really draining after a while, especially at times when you feel tired or you're in a hurry, or there's times that you just want to be alone. I mean, everyone needs to be alone. Everyone wants a minute of my time. Everyone wants just 1 minute, but there's 50 people who want 1 minute, and that all adds up.
There's not a lot of free time these days, but when he does have it, David comes home to Lake Minnetonka.
Well,
this is great.
Yeah, we have all the hardwood floors and the.
Did you pick this out?
Well, what's funny about this
you
house,
got your bear rugs.
Yeah, we have these are from Australia. The sheepskins here.
This summer, he and his brother John bought a house on the lake where they room together when they're not on the road.
Conditions are right, the wind is right, the water's right, and the boat's right, so let's go do it. I brought my surfboard home and realized that, the breakers weren't rolling in, so I figured that if I had a windsurfer, I could catch some of the wind, but on a day like today, when there's no wind, no waves, you do the next best thing and get on your surfboard and go behind the boat. Set some trends out here while I'm at, make an impact on this lake. Yeah, people always ask me where I'm from, and I say, well, I'm from Lake Minnetonka, and I'm going to be from Lake Minnetonka probably for the rest of my life. But it's just, I like the combination of things I do here. The winter, I love the winter here. First of all, a lot of people in Minnesota don't like the winters. And I like being out in the cold and playing hockey outside and going skiing and doing all sorts of things outdoors. I really like the outdoors. And plus, it's kind of away from all the hype that, in LA or New York, a lot of the guys that are from there, they have a lot of problems with, it's just, life's too fast. And, I don't want that. I want my life to go too fast. That's a great save right there. He's expected to save that, though. All goalies are expected to save everything. Never let anything go in.
If you look around Met Center during a North Stars hockey game, chances are you'll find David there. He's a season ticket holder and one of the team's biggest fans. This fall, he served as honorary celebrity captain of the North Stars. A talented junior player, he probably could have played professional hockey.
Do I look like a North Star? That's the important thing. You know, as a kid, I always wanted to be a hockey player, and somehow tennis got in the way, but it's a lot of fun really skating out here with the guys and shooting the puck around a little bit. It really is.
I think it's interesting that you chose tennis over hockey if you were good in both sports, because as a Minnesotan, I would think the pressure would be, or the inclination would be more towards choosing hockey as your sport.
I didn't like the fact in hockey that if I played well, we could lose. I never liked that. I always wanted to be responsible for the winning and losing in the sport I was playing. I felt like in tennis, I was out there by myself. I kind of liked the aspect of trying to figure out how to win. And then if I didn't play well, I lost. Well, that was more acceptable because, you know, it's my fault.
Get your U.S. Open magazine here, official magazine of the U.S. Open. Pictures and articles and all your favorite players.
We don't follow him to all the tournaments. We just come to a few. We went to Wimbledon and the U.S. Open. But he doesn't like an entourage. He doesn't like a whole lot of people following him around. But I think he likes to have the family here.
Game, Wheaton, he leads 2-1.
David gives his mother, Mary Jane, who likes to watch his matches alone, much of the credit for his confidence and his ranking today on the Pro Tour.
Well, it seems like David's got some renewed vigor here.
He's playing quite well, but so is Richard Fromberg returning quite well. You know, they're both playing fairly even right now. I've seen some great changes in David. He concentrates better. It's serious business with him. He is striving for perfection in his own game. And here he is seated here at the U.S. Open. I mean, that's wonderful growth and progress.
And whereas David Wheaton, as a representative of American tennis, has brought the highest degree of dignity and class to the sport, both on and off the court. Now, therefore, I, Arnie Carlson, Governor of the State of Minnesota, do hereby proclaim Monday, September 23rd, 1991, to be David Wheaton Day.
Well, at what age do you think, David, you'll be finished with tennis?
Ideally, I'd like to play tennis until I'm, maybe 30, 32. 8 or 10 more years. I've put a lot into this game. I'm just not ready to give it up that easily, I want to stay up there. It's exciting. It's fun to me now, It's fun playing those big matches. That's why I play. I like, as much as you don't like to get nervous and the butterflies and you feel like you don't know whether you're going to win or lose, it's the unsurety of it all. If I really break it down, that's what I play for, is that just that adrenaline rush and getting there, and it's that whole aura around competition that really keeps me coming back.
Still ahead, Irwin Jacobs scores big by bringing the International Special Olympics to town. But what will the wealthy tycoon do for an encore? When a Pat Miles special continues.
Welcome to the office of one of the most powerful movers and shakers in this country. This is a place where million-dollar deals are cut, where financial dramas are played out. It belongs to Irwin Jacobs, the Minneapolis tycoon who will go down in history as one of the Wall Street Raiders of the 1980s. Nicknamed Irv the Liquidator by the Wall Street Journal, Irwin has made so much money, he's not even sure what he's worth. And it all began in his North Minneapolis neighborhood when he was 9 years old and made his first profit selling vegetables to a local grocer.
What you see in me is the same thing you saw in me 40 years ago as a 10-year-old boy. Whether I was selling marbles or whether I had a lemonade stand, I was the one that was screaming the loudest or raising my hand, or I had a vegetable stand. I decided to open a vegetable market one day when I was 9 years old. Things have been tough, I get tougher. And when things were good, I watched with a great sense of accomplishment.
Did your father live, Irwin, long enough for you to be able to give something back? I mean, did he see you in these surroundings? Did he know what a success story you were?
Well, you got to know my father to know that I was a success in his eyes the day I was born. He thought I could do no wrong. And I remember bringing him out here to show him the house the first day that when I bought it. He had come back from a trip with my mother. He said, "That's a hotel." I said, "No, that's the house." And they just didn't say a word. He said, "This is the most incredible place I have ever seen in my life." And he started to cry. Tears started coming out of his eyes. He takes a look, and I said, "Why?" He says, "I'm so happy for you, I don't know what to say."
This is a financial fairy tale that began almost 20 years ago when Irwin Jacobs, a young college dropout from North Minneapolis, walked into the Marquette Bank, shook hands with Carl Pohlad, and proceeded to ask the bank president for a $4 million loan.
When he outlined the proposal, it was obvious to me that it was well thought out and that it made a lot of sense. So we simply made him a loan in order to execute his plan of purchase, and that's how our relationship got started.
Irwin used the money to buy the Grainbelt Brewery, but unable to manage it successfully, he turned around and sold the business in less than a year. He made a $4 million profit. 3 months later, he and Pohlad were back in business again, but this time as partners, buying up a local company that had gone bankrupt.
I made the greatest transaction of my entire life, ever, and that was the WT grant receivables on a relative basis. I made more money in that transaction quicker than anything I'd ever done.
Armed with the $9 million he made on the WT grant deal, Irwin turned his attention to Wall Street, where the boom of the early 1980s was just getting started. And Irwin landed right in the middle of it, with his newly acquired fortune and the genius to put his money to work.
In all of the situations you've been in, competitive situations, is there a situation or an individual that has been your toughest competition?
The most unique situation I had run across was this guy Bill Smith at Pabst in Milwaukee, where at the time it was put down as the longest takeover fight in Wall Street's history. That situation created the whole 80s for me. At the same time, it was without a doubt the worst individual situation I had been associated with in the 80s. And to use the word the most competitive, yeah, because they went to any extent and any extreme. And it was one that I did not like, and yet it made me a very fierce competitor. The only thing I think about is putting foolish money into an older building. You know, when you think about the opportunity of a new building or something relatively new, not brand new. But
it didn't take long for Irwin to become one of the most respected and feared deal makers in the country, taking on companies like Walt Disney, Kaiser Steel, ITT, and McGraw-Hill.
I didn't see it from an outsider looking in. I saw it from the inside looking at it. And there's a lot of things, frankly, I didn't like about it after I look back onto what it is. And
a lot of characters, too, that weren't all that smooth.
Absolutely.
That you hung out with. The Predators, right?
You say hung out?
Okay, I'm trying to imagine Irwin Jacobs at the Predators ball. And he says, and here comes the liquidator from Minneapolis.
You know, I was the so-called one of the players of the 80s. I was one of these people that was, when you see a paragraph, like you say, the Predators ball, or you'd read a book, or you'd read something that'd say so-and-so, so-and-so, and Irwin Jacobs, and I'd say, wait a minute, I'm not like, even at the time, why am I in there? I wasn't any part of that, but they generically put me in a category with these people. And when I look back and saw some of those names that my name was attached with, who ended up being in jail or ruined for life based on what they did, it was just the most awful. I mean, it was like being in the room with somebody when you didn't know what they were doing, and it's very criminal.
It's the
scary.
Old birds of a feather flock together.
Well, not this one. Not this one, I can tell you, but no way.
Irwin's instincts are pretty good about keeping out of trouble. For example, very early on, in one transaction, he was looking for financing, and I think Ivan Boesky came in, and Irwin talked to him and instinctively didn't trust the man and never wanted to do business with him.
Irwin's instinct served him well where Ivan Boesky was concerned. This was the man who was convicted of insider trading and sentenced to 3 years in prison. In 1986, Fortune magazine named Boesky Crook of the Year.
If you had been operating in New York City rather than in Minneapolis, Minnesota, What are the chances that the same thing could have happened to you? The disease could have...
I said to somebody that what saved my life was living where I live.
Quite honestly, the early years of all of this corporate raiding or whatever, I looked at it differently than corporate raider, but that's what he was called, along with quite a few other people. I didn't like the adverse publicity. I don't like that. But I got very thick-skinned. I mean, you have to. And I wanted to support him. But I didn't like what I was reading, and a lot of it wasn't even accurate.
Irwin's wife, Alex, was the apple of his eye from the moment they met as teenagers. She says initially she wasn't as sure about him. He was a little too flashy for her taste. But together they combined their strengths, she as the artist, he as the entrepreneur, and built their family, 5 children in all.
When the children were very little, he was always there. I looked forward to when he came home at night, and I sort of said, "They're yours." And his traveling schedule wasn't the way it is now. He was always there when they were very small, and especially with Sheila. She didn't walk till she was 7.
Sheila, now in her 20s, is mentally retarded. She suffered 2 debilitating strokes after her birth and almost died. When she lived, doctors said Sheila would never be able to feed herself, to walk, or to speak.
She had a strong impact because I knew I had to make a living and have a sensitivity and give the need to my family of what they needed to get through this and be very strong and show some leadership qualities that maybe I wasn't born with myself, to be able to deal with this crisis. At the same time, I wanted to make sure that she had all of the things necessary to give her every chance in life that she could have.
Smile pretty. We'll put on that blush. Okay.
Today, Sheila participates in programs at Functional Industries, where her father subsidized this new building. And it was Sheila who inspired Irwin's $8 million investment to bring the International Special Olympics to Minnesota this past summer.
But she was in a wheelchair in the chute there, and I went in there, and they were cheering for her when we started going down inside where the fans couldn't see her. And I looked at her, and tears were coming down her eyes. I said, "Sheila, you okay?" She says, "Daddy, I'm so happy." And of course, at that point, you could have just, I said, "Let's go." She's dragging me through, and oh, God, she had the best. She thinks she's a movie star today.
This was a side of Irwin Jacobs Minnesotans had never seen before. A father, a community man, giving not only his money, but his time and his talent for making things work.
Hi, nice to have you, Geshiva. Thank you for coming.
In Minnesota, Irwin's most famous and most public corporate battle has been for control of the Minnesota Vikings. He and his partner Carl Pohlad own 50.6% of the team, but they're still fighting Mike Lynn and his group for control. They've been in court for 6 years and still haven't been able to resolve anything. What is it you're fighting for?
Straightforward. It was to get Mike Lynn out of there. That was one. And 2 was to take the club over in the sense of bringing what I think to be some responsible ways of managing and running a football club. Not by me. I mean, I would be an owner. I'm not interested in running it myself. I am told that we will have a trial, God willing, next spring.
What's the biggest success you've had?
I hope my family.
Worst failure?
It's not my failure as much as being part of what I see took place in the 80s, that I believed in what I did then and now, but I was part of an extension of that period of time that, frankly, if I was to do it all over again, I would question whether I would or wouldn't.
The takeovers?
Yeah. It was too imposing and too dramatic.
And destructive?
Yes, yeah, there was destructive parts to it, yes, because I would agree, and I probably played part of it, because the fact is, how much gain was there when so many lawyers and accountants and investment bankers were getting paid millions of dollars when people were getting put out of jobs? I mean, what simpler way could you say it than that? If I believed at the time that I was doing it for the wrong reasons, then I couldn't face you and even give you this interview. I mean, I didn't go there as a bandit to hold somebody up. I went there with a business idea and a judgment of what I believed right from wrong. My wealth didn't come from the stock market as it stands alone. I made it in my businesses. I love the boat business, starting with little Larson boats up in Little Falls, and then we have 14 boat companies today throughout the world, and there's not a question that we're a leader in this industry in more ways than one. Built this from nothing. It's the first thing in my life that literally I have built, I mean from the ground up.
And you're building a boat now, a new boat.
Building a
for
new
yourself.
boat, yes we are. And I'm just tickled that this has happened, that we've gotten into large mega yachts in the Hatteras division.
Besides his stake in the boating industry, Irwin owns and manages a multitude of other companies all across the country. He's also turned his financial savvy on Wall Street in a new direction. Called the Jacobs Investment Fund, Irwin is putting together a $1 billion cash reserve for investments, and he's put up $75 million of his own.
Irwin, do you know what you're worth?
No, and that's not to impress you that it's so much money and what it is, because even a balance sheet doesn't tell you what somebody's worth. My life has been so good. And I know I've often said this before, that life has never been created to be perfect, because what would you look forward to if it was perfect? It would be nothing. But if there's a perfect life, I have it.
A Pat Miles special will continue in a moment.
When the Vikings take the field at the Metrodome, Mike Lynn still hangs on every play from this owner's suite. It's been just over a year ago since he quit as general manager of the team and took on the World League of American Football. Today, Mike is on what he calls a sabbatical from the game. And surprisingly, he seems to be enjoying his life on the sidelines.
I was on Rainy Lake in a houseboat. I went to the North Shore. We visited Duluth. I've been to the Grand Canyon. I've been to Sedona.
Mike Lynn's had time for some sightseeing since he left the World League in August. A change in league structure and the fact that he wasn't getting paid led Mike to the decision to get out of administration.
I just felt it was about time for me to take a sabbatical, and I'm not sure how long it's going to last. It could last 2 months. It could last 4 months. It could last 6 months, or it could last a year.
He's wide open, wide open.
But he's still on the Vikings board of directors, and he says most of his assets are tied up in that club. His greatest hope for the future is that the ownership issue will be resolved. In the meantime, Mike has resolved his own feud with Max Winter.
You know, we had a nice long conversation, about things, and everything is back on track and fine, and I feel good about it.
A year and a half ago, we met Cindy Speltz on her pilgrimage to Medjugorje, Yugoslavia. It's a site where the Virgin Mary is said to appear. Cindy still suffers from a rare skin disease which causes severe blistering and which made it difficult for her to climb the sacred mountains surrounding Medjugorje. But Cindy says it was a small sacrifice. And just last week, Cindy had a chance to relive her visit when one of the 5 visionaries, Yvonne, visited the Twin Cities.
Well, I was so delighted to see him in the Twin Cities, and I brought my children because I wanted them to hear firsthand from Yvonne the important messages.
A Pat Miles special will continue in a moment.
Thanks to Tammy Faye Baker, Irwin Jacobs, and David Wheaton tonight for allowing us this peek at their personal life, and to all of the people who helped put this program together. And a special thanks to you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed watching this show as much as we enjoyed putting it together. Good night, everyone.
A Pat Miles special has been brought to you by T-Fall. When it comes to deep frying, we've thought of it all. And by Menards, your complete home improvement headquarters.